Hello everyone and welcome to Golden Key Education Accelerated English video series. In this particular video we're going to look at persuasive language analysis and the components and the ingredients that really make up for a great persuasive language analysis essay. So, what are the different structural components of a persuasive language analysis piece? We start with your introduction. Your introduction is something that you should look to allocate around 150 words to. And in that introduction, you should cover the following points. You should provide a brief background of what the subject matter is, why it's topical, why it's important, why are people talking about it. You should look to introduce the author or the writer or the columnist, however you want to frame that person. You should comment on the tone and the register of the piece, because the tone and the register is essentially the voice behind the narrative that's carrying it from start to finish. You should look to identify the target audience group or groups, which are essentially the individuals that the writer is trying to target. They're the people that the writer is trying to persuade and convince. And you should identify what demographic they belong to. Are they young? Are they old? Students? Retired? Blue collar? White collar? Male or female? Each one of these groups have different needs, different concerns, different worries, and therefore they're subject to different persuasive forms. You need to comment on the end game of the writer, essentially identifying their purpose and intent. In spite of the myriad of different analytical and persuasive techniques that can apply, their core message should be very simple, should be very robust, and it should be one thing they're trying to target, and you need to identify that up front. Each one of these 5 points requires around 1 sentence each. That's what you should aim for, altogether around about 150 words. The body is where the bulk of your analysis sits. You should aim for at least 3 paragraphs. Some analyses warrant 4 paragraphs. There is no hard and fast rule as to how many you should have. It all depends on the nature of the piece. And the varied and diverse nature of opinion pieces means that optimally, some require 3, whereas others require 4. It's something that you need to make a judgment call on, and that's going to come through experience. If you do go for 3 paragraphs though, you should target around 200 and 250 words maximum. And now each paragraph is a separate body of analysis unto itself. What that means is that that paragraph, which sits inside a broader analysis landscape, should the rest of that analysis fall away and that paragraph was to sit by itself, that paragraph in isolation should still stand on its own legs as a cohesive and comprehensive piece. So it should be able to exist in isolation despite everything else around it. That said, in practice, the paragraph doesn't exist in isolation. It actually exists within a broader context. So you need to make sure that that paragraph is integrated with your broader analysis. And the way you integrate that is through the theme of the analysis. You may decide to group content according to the following advice. Again, it is advice only. There is no hard and fast rule because persuasive pieces can be so diverse. But you may decide to group content according to theme. You can undergo logical categorization where organically certain types of content go well together versus other types of content. Or you can go for technical content mix, whereby in one particular paragraph, following a single theme, you might decide to incorporate both audio, visual, and textual evidence. And so therefore you have bits and pieces from each domain that all follow the same theme, covered and discussed in that one paragraph. What are the key considerations you should always keep in mind when writing your analytical paragraphs? You should combine and collate different types of evidence in order to fully and comprehensively articulate the writer's persuasive direction. Where are they taking readers? What is their end game and how are they doing it? What evidence are they using in order to achieve that final objective? You need to incorporate non-text stimuli, including auditory and visuals as well as imagery into your body of analysis. And to do that successfully is going to make or break that piece. You need to engage your own audience by making your analysis relevant. Essentially, a reader should be able to pick up your analysis and gain insight from it that they would not otherwise gain if they were to read that article by themselves. Your conclusion is very stock standard, it's highly formulaic, that's just the way it is. There's nothing innovative about it. It should be a simple summary of your contention and everything else that you've talked about in your body. You should never introduce new content in your conclusion. That said, it only needs about 100 words maximum in order to fulfill that requirement. What are the various techniques that writers employ in their persuasive pieces? There are structural components that they use in order to emphasize certain things. They can use capitalization or italics to deliver that emphasis. They can also use hyperlinks to show that their piece is well researched and that their opinions are actually valid. They can use different forms of authority, including statistical evidence and empirical evidence, which essentially gives body to their argument. A form of soft persuasion is emotional persuasion. Statistics essentially give it more body and more volume. They can use rhetorical questioning, which isn't really a form of evidence in itself, but what it does is it sets a prerogative, it sets a strategic direction, and it preconditions the reader's mind so that they think in a certain way that's conducive to what the writer is trying to argue. They can also introduce expert opinion, subject matter experts, that essentially say things that are consistent and conducive to what the writer is saying. And so they generally selectively choose bodies of expert opinion that just so happens to agree with what they're trying to say. There are different forms of appeal as well. These appeals can be highly varied. Appeals are almost always emotional in nature. So make sure you're able to pick these up when you go through these persuasive pieces. There's also the inclusion of auditory and imagery. The imagery that I'm looking at here are not pictures, they're more to do with words that create images or sounds in your mind. And these things can include short and sharp sentences that really get to the point very quickly. They can include repetition and rhythm in order to build up a certain idea and to create momentum behind a certain idea. They can include images themselves, where certain words really resonate with readers. They can be similes and metaphors in order to try and make things more relevant by connecting those ideas to something that we're familiar with. And they can be something more playful, like puns. And then there's your basic visuals, which include graphs, tables, and diagrams. And these are very useful tools that allow you to deliver a lot of content, a lot of information succinctly, which you would otherwise need a lot of words to deliver. So here's an example of a piece that incorporates some of those techniques that we've looked at earlier. In this case, it's a technology opinion piece that appears in The Age. So let's look at the title. The title is very accessible. Is technology too easy to use? At its simplest level, it's almost a binary question. Right? Is technology too easy to use? It's either a yes or a no. And then you can go on further from there. But at the outset, it's something that's very easy to consume. Anyone can read that sentence and instantly get what the article is trying to talk about. So it's highly accessible. That topic sentence there is all about accessibility and immediately engaging the reader with very little follow-up. We've got a center image here, which is the centerpiece of this particular section. We've got a black background with nothing there, and the reason for that is the writer wants you to focus on the foreground. And the foreground is, as we all know, Facebook's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, He is the figurehead of Facebook. Facebook is a technological company in social media and therefore something that is relevant to the topic at hand. So the image that's created here, the impression that is created here is what is technology. So the reader is now channeled towards a certain aspect of technology. We're not talking about trains or planes, we're talking about social media, that type of technology. And by using an image, instantly we're channeled down that theme. And then there's just the hand gesture there to show that he's in an auditory environment, he's giving some sort of a lecture. It just adds a bit more dynamicism to the piece. So in this particular segment here from that same article, we have expert opinion, right? So essentially that expert there is saying something that the writer is trying to say, but instead of the writer saying it, he's essentially getting someone else to say it for him. We've also got what is essentially a very strong statement here in the bottom. The statement is, there is nothing wrong with making things easier. Now, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with it, regardless of whether that statement is right or wrong, it is a very absolute statement. It's very deterministic. There is no variation at all. It is the right thing and nothing else can countermand it, right? There is nothing wrong with making things easier. It's set, it's definite. There's no veering away from it. And again, it's a channeling tool that's designed to point the reader towards a certain way of thinking, push them towards a certain direction. And then there's this image here, which is in some ways similar, but also in other ways contrastive to the image that we saw earlier of Facebook CEO. So in this particular image here, we've got a background that's very metropolis, that's quite busy. And we've got the foreground here that is essentially Uber, another technology company that's in the business of logistics, essentially ferrying people to and from different locations. So if we go back earlier to this image is very polarizing and binary. We've got a black background with nothing, and then the centerpiece is Facebook's CEO. That's the effect they're trying to go for. With this image, it's a bit more varied. They want to give a bit more background context. So the background is, it's a metropolis setting, there's a vehicle, people are going to and from places, almost like an airport, very busy. In the foreground is the company Uber, and Uber is in the business of ferrying people to and from different locations, or at least a technology platform that allows people to do that. So the background is faded out because we do want to give focus to the company, which is essentially core to the theme of technology, but the background gives a bit more context into what that foreground is. And here, again from the same article, another combination of text and imagery. We have an example of a rhetorical question here, and that rhetorical question essentially contextualizes a certain idea. And it's a way of asking a question which gives the reader the impression that they're in control, that they have flexibility to think in a way that is of their own choosing. Whereas in reality and in practice, the wording of the question again preconditions their mind so that they think in a certain way that is conducive to what the writer wants. And at the bottom here, we have essentially an example of groupthink. This is an advocate group. And essentially, like an expert opinion, they're saying things that are similar or conducive to what the writer is saying. But instead, as opposed to an individual, they are a group. But again,